Hello everyone, and welcome to today's episode number 9. So the holidays are over, kids have gone back to school, and work has resumed as normal. So I have now got one show under my belt. This year I will be doing less shows this winter. Because my ex-managing director is going to be taking over some of the shows that I go to, and it's going to leave me just doing stuff in the office and other bits and pieces. It will still allow me to set up the equipment for the shows up until possibly December, and then the kit will go down to the show data, and then it won't be my problem anymore, which is a good thing. So I don't really have a topic for this episode, so I'm just going to recap a few things. So because I was on site at Eco Summit, I didn't get to watch the Belgian Grand Prix, and now I've had the chance to watch the Belgian Grand Prix. It was pretty good. The result was okay. It was a really good result for Lewis Hamilton, so good on him. And then this past weekend we had the Italian Grand Prix, and that was good too. I enjoyed it. It wasn't spectacular, but I enjoyed some of the scraps. What made it more interesting was that a couple of my predictions have basically come to be true. Felipe Massa has announced his retirement, which is something I have been talking about. Also, something that was slightly surprising was Jenson Button also came out and said that he's going to take a year out, and then he'll have an option to race in 2018. Now, usually when racing drivers do that, take a year out, they hardly come back. So what tends to happen is a racing driver that wants to take a year out, them wanting to come back is usually very difficult, because there's new drivers from different formula, or there's people that have moved and they can't get back into the team. And obviously in the case of Mika Hakkinen, he took a year out and never came back. Robert Kubica had an accident and decided to go and join another formula instead, even though he was a really good driver in Formula 1, and the World Championship was possibly in his sights. So he decided against it and then went off to do something completely different. So I think Jenson Button has probably put the nail in the coffin of his F1 driver's career. He might have a good career in management or something along those lines, but as a driver, I doubt that he'll be able to just jump back straight into a car. Okay, so there was another incident in the Formula 1 paddock, and that was the sale of Formula 1. And I don't really know too much about it. The guys on Sky F1 were trying to formulate and piece together the facts that they had, but it seems like a large company who want to take the sport into a more profitable direction have put up their intention, and possibly by today they may have even signed the contract. So their intention was to buy Formula One and get it into as many revenue streams as possible. And I think that's a good thing, because Formula One doesn't really follow like the current trends. They don't use certain revenue streams as other sports do, and sometimes it seems like they are quite I don't really like to use this word, but backward. So yeah, exciting times. I'm not sure if these guys are going to be any good. I don't know who they are. I'm going to do some research on them. So the next race is Singapore, and that's a nice race. It's also a night race, and it's on a street track. So this weekend, I don't think we'll be watching any movies or any new movies. I think the next one is going to be Doctor Strange, as I've said previously, and I've tried to stay away from any trailers apart from that first one I accidentally saw. But there's some positive comments about the movie, so I have... Okay, some tech news. Those of you who use Google Drive to save all your documents and files, Google Drive now keeps an older copy, and anything newer is obviously active. Anything older is kept in revision history. So technically all your data will be backed up somewhere and available to other people and yourself. I'm not too sure if I like that. Okay, it's good that you've got a backup of something, but say if you had a file and you wrote something in there that you didn't want to fall into the wrong hands, or it had your social security number, or anything that's sensitive and will uniquely identify you, and that's made available only to you. Obviously it's going to be your account, but if hackers get their hands on it, God knows what they can do. So if you've then changed the file and saved it, maybe, I don't know, a week later after realizing what you had done, that other information is still stored, and it may be available to others if a hacker does actually get hold of it. So not too sure about that. Obviously anything sensitive I would keep locally. I wouldn't use cloud-based services. So again, if you trust the cloud, then I guess it will be something that you'll use regardless. For me, I think I'll put non-sensitive things on Google Drive from now on. Okay, so there's some more tech news in regards to Microsoft and Google's web browsers seem to be entwined in some ad fraud. So the ad data, the data from the impressions is going back to the ad company, whether it be Google or any other, would show 50% of the impressions that have fed back belong to non-human interaction. I don't know how they measure. Well, don't know how they measured this, but it is happening. So, Internet Explorer, 50% of the impressions served were deemed to be non-human. About 20.5% of Google Chrome's impressions were non-human. 5% of impressions from Mozilla Firefox, Safari, and Microsoft Edge seemed to be non-human. Okay, so 5% for all of those three isn't too bad. So what's actually causing this? Is this bad code? Or is this incorrect readings from the ad companies? I don't know who's actually measuring this, to be fair. It doesn't say. However, there are some uncertainties about the validity of Fraud Logic's method. Okay, so a company called Fraud Logic, Logics with a GIX at the end, analyzed the data. So I guess, I'm not sure, but I guess they've done a few different tests to see if this is true or not. But even in this article, people are saying that their test routines might not be valid, so it could just be nonsensical information. So a couple of things I'm looking forward to this winter is Westworld, the series. I think that's going to be interesting. So it's been a strange week. We've had the Star Trek, a 50-year anniversary, and it didn't feel like it. We did get a movie with a tribute, shall we say, to Star Trek, but we didn't get any shows or documentaries leading up to it. Not that I found anyway on British TV. The only thing I saw was the Big Bang Theory Trekiversary, which was a bit of an insult really, because it was mainly about Star Wars. This past weekend we also had CM Punk's first UFC fight, and that did not go down very well. He lost his match, and some people are saying he was out of his league. Some people are really supporting him. I think he did a good job. I think it's a hard thing to get into, especially if you are a wrestler and you're on the complete other side of the spectrum. And also, you have to remember he lost, which is fine. I don't think anyone believed that he was going to win anyway. Brock Lesnar lost his first UFC fight, and he actually lost it a lot quicker. At least CM Punk held it in there for a while. So I'm podcasting from Manchester. I'm at the Insight Show, which is a show that our sister company usually runs, but they were double booked, so I came along, and seems pretty quiet. There's not much happening at the moment, but there's a lot of tech companies here. So you've got all the usual HP, Microsoft, Dell, and what have you, but then you've also got these other ones I've never heard of, and then you've also got antivirus companies as well. And I thought to myself, what are antivirus companies doing? There's a lot of companies exhibiting, and there'll be a lot of people coming to the show tomorrow. We're estimating about 700 in total. We've definitely got the equipment to take care of 700 people. I think we've got more equipment than necessary. It seems like complete overkill to me, but it is what the organizer wants, so the organizer gets. Today's main topic is Star Trek and its 50-year anniversary. Star Trek has been around for a long time, 50 years in fact, or 50 official years. The creator of Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry, he actually had a pilot filmed in I think it was 64 when The Cage was filmed, and so he was developing it a lot earlier than that even. The pilot episode called The Cage was originally filmed in 1964, if memory serves me correctly, and what happened then, it was canned by the network, and they said, well, it's too complicated for the average person, so it was put to one side. But that didn't stop Gene Roddenberry, so he came back, changed the formula a little. He didn't want to change certain things, which was a good thing, like having Mr. Spock. But this time, he included a multicultural, multiracial cast. I think there were some other races in The Cage. I can't remember now, but I'm sure there was. And when it got its second chance, people liked it. Not a lot of people liked it, because I think it was on Stupid Times, and then it went to the graveyard shift, which is I think it's a Friday after 8 o'clock or after 9 o'clock. That's when shows tend to die, because the networks move them across to Friday nights. But the good thing is, it got syndicated to all the different channels all across the US, and then more people saw it, and it became a Saturday morning kind of kids TV program. So there were a lot of kids watching it, and there was a lot of adults watching it, and it became a cultural phenomenon, really, to this very day, and went along on its merry way. But it didn't last the 5 years that the intro claimed. It only lasted for 3 years, so 3 series of about 22 to 26 episodes, something like that. And then it just disappeared into the TV schedules, and it was always on somewhere at some time in some country, which is really, really good. And what happened was, Star Wars came out in 1977, was it? 77? Yeah, 77. And Paramount thought, hold on a minute, we've got, or was it CBS? So the crazy thing about Star Trek is it's owned by 2 different companies, and the companies are CBS and Paramount, and Paramount owns all the movie rights, and CBS owns all the TV rights, and they all make their own productions, but they obviously borrow the storylines, borrow costumes, etc, etc. And it's actually quite a good formula for them, I guess. So what happens now is, Star Wars comes out, Paramount's thinking, wow, this Star Wars movie is fucking amazing. Oops, sorry. I don't think I should swear. So Star Wars comes out, it's a success, and Paramount thinks, hold on, we've got a spacey kind of property as well. What are we going to do with it? Let's do something with it. So Gene Roddenberry and his team were hurried into making the second series that they were going to do into a movie. So the second series was planned, and it was going to be called Star Trek Phase 2, and it ended up being Star Trek the next I almost said the next generation. It became Star Trek the motion picture, and so that's why you see the costumes the way they are. So they're not like the TV show, and they're not like the later movies, but they do look like something you'd see on a 70s TV show in space. I didn't like the costumes in the movie, and I'm glad they changed it for Star Trek 2, which was probably one of the best Star Trek movies, or action sci-fi adventure movies of the 80s, I would say. And what they did for Star Trek 2 was bring back an old enemy from series 1 of the TV show, and it worked really well. I mean, the backstory was there, people knew about it, and the hate that Khan had for Kirk seemed really genuine, and he did a good job in acting in the role of Khan. And Ricardo Montalban, who was also in The Love Boat, he did all of his lines nowhere near William Shatner, because they were on different schedules. So if you have a look at the movie, you'll see that they're talking to each other and they're facing off with one another, and they are never in the same room at the same time ever. So it's quite interesting how they pull that off. The battle scenes in the movie were awesome as well, inside the nebula. And I know I've skipped over the whole of Star Trek the motion picture, but it's a better movie to talk about. I didn't mind the story for the motion picture. At one point it was the most expensive movie ever made, and they kept adding to it. Even up to release, they kept adding footage, more footage, and it is spectacular that they got effects like that done. And you know, this was before computer generated images. I would class it as a good sci-fi movie, not a good Star Trek movie. A lot of people think it's really, really long, and which it is. It seems like some of the scenes go on forever and ever. But I think the best part of that movie is when they see the Enterprise for the first time since its refit, and it's beautiful. The camera work panning around the ship is amazing, and it just makes you feel so good inside. So back to Star Trek 2. So Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan. What else can I say? It had a good storyline. It had some good action. It was a proper Star Trek-y style adventure with a good villain, and that's not something you get much of these days. But ultimately, the end of the movie saw the demise of Spock, or Captain Spock. Was he captain at that point? I think he was. He died saving the rest of the ship, and we then come to Star Trek 3, where they are finding Spock. Okay, you might think that's a bit weird. You might not. I've left out some information from Star Trek 2, but it's been around for a while, so I am going to spoil it. In Star Trek 2, when his body died, he had transferred his Katra, his so-called living spirit, with Dr. McCoy. So Dr. McCoy has got all of Spock's memories and his soul, and the shell of Spock went inside the antimatter chamber and obviously died. But they shot his body at the end of the movie out into space, and it landed on the Genesis planet, which is what Khan and Kirk are partly fighting for. So then in Star Trek 3, Spock's dad comes to Kirk and says, "Dude, what the fuck have you done with my son?" And Kirk turns around and says, "What the hell, man? The dude's dead. I'm sorry. I feel the pain as well, but my friend is dead." And Sarek slaps the fuck into Kirk. Only his body was dead. This is the weirdest thing. So all Vulcans, when they think they are about to die but want to live, they will then transfer their living souls into other people. It's a bit weird, but okay, we'll go with it. They go to find Spock's body on the Genesis planet. They have to steal back the Enterprise because Starfleet was going to decommission it because it's really old now. So while the Enterprise crew steals the Enterprise, a Klingon commander, Krug, played by Christopher Lloyd, wants to have the Genesis device for himself. So he's after it now. So first Khan was after it, now this Klingon commander's after it, and he'll stop at nothing to get it. So so all that happens and it's all good. To be honest with you, I don't really want to do every single part of the movie, so I'm just going to skip bits and pieces. So they go and find Spock. They find Spock, and they have to basically merge his Katra back into his body and out of Dr. McCoy's. Dr. McCoy's going crazy at this present moment in time, and he's basically living two lives or having two memories. Okay, so now Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, is a movie about the Starship Enterprise crew, now in a Klingon bird of prey, on their way home after the ceremony. I think they were 3 months into... 3 months after putting Spock's Katra back into his body, they decided to go home. They were exiled, apparently, so I don't know how that was arranged, but they were on their way home to answer for their crimes. So they were on their way, and they got to Earth, and the Earth was in the process of being attacked by a giant space probe, and it kept talking to the Earth, but nothing would respond back to it. So it was just creating loads of havoc, and it was creating earthquakes and, all sorts of crazy natural disasters. So Kirk and the crew discovered that the sound that the probe was making was similar as whale song, but in the 23rd century the whales have been extinct, so they have to find some whales from somewhere. So they have this idea about slingshotting around the sun and gaining enough power to time travel. So Spock does some calculations and now he's back to normal, normalish, and he makes a good guess. He ends up landing in the 1980s, and they try to find some humpback whales, and it's a very funny movie. I enjoyed it immensely. I watch it all the time. I watch all the others all the time as well. It's a good movie to watch if you're not a Star Trek fan, I would say. They have to take the whales back to the future, so they have to modify the ship. They have to trying to find some fuel. They have to rescue Chekhov from the hospital. It all gets really crazy, and because it's set in our modern times, or what was the modern time then in the 80s, it feels really good to watch because you see them in your environment instead of always seeing them in their environment. Yeah, so they go back, they answer for their crimes, but as they get let off, Captain Kirk gets demoted from Admiral back to Captain, which is what he wanted in the first place. So it works out for everyone. And Spock and Sarek seem to get a bit more closer, which is a good thing, I guess. So Star Trek 5 is directed by William Shatner, and Star Trek 3 and 4 were directed by Leonard Nimoy, who plays Spock, and I enjoyed it. It's a good. You see them on a different level. You see them camping. You see the guys just taking a break. They don't want to go back to work, but they're forced to do so. It's a good movie. It's quite action adventure. I think it brings a lot to the characters it brings a lot to the characters. Okay, so the next movie in the lot is Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, and that is probably another one of my favorites. So you've got The Wrath of Khan, and then The Undiscovered Country, and you've got The Voyage Home. Those three are probably the better ones, even though 3 is good as well. 2, 3 and 4 are the best trilogy ever made after the Back to the Future trilogy, I think. And Star Trek 6, it takes on a different role. It's quite good. It's like a murder mystery, and I like that. It's one that's filmed really well. It's got a nice look to it, and then it's got quite a bittersweet ending to it, because it's their last mission together, and right at the end of the movie they all sign their names, and it really brings a tear to your eye. It did for me, and I thought this was the end, but then wait, no, it's not the end. So while Star Trek 6 was being filmed, we already had Star Trek The Next Generation in production. So 1987 saw Star Trek The Next Generation, which is set around 70 years in the future of Kirk's future, should I say, not our future. Technology's advanced, ships have advanced, the uniforms are a lot nicer. We've got a new captain, and he looks like Professor Xavier from the X-Men, and that's awesome. Yeah, it's a great series. It's the series I grew up with, so I have some fond memories of it. I've got a list of episodes as long as my arm that I would love to watch again and again. I'm not saying the old series is bad. The old series is amazing. It's groundbreaking. It's it's something that can never be repeated. Because like the original series had multicultural cast, which was never done in those days. You had a Chinese guy. Well, he's meant to be Japanese Chinese guy. You also had a black woman in a position of power. You had, I think she was like fourth or fifth in command. They were something special back then. And now I had Next Generation to deal with, and that was amazing. I tuned in every week to watch it. After that, we had Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which was a complete departure for a Star Trek series, because they weren't traveling in space. They were stationary on a space station. They did do some traveling, but nothing like exploring the galaxy like the previous two series did. So yeah, that was hard to get into, to be fair. I did like the characters, but I think it was after series 4 or 5 that it got really interesting. There were some great episodes in between, but as a whole series it got really good. And while that was going on, we had Star Trek Voyager launch, which was another series based on space travel again and exploring, and they got thrown into the Delta Quadrant, and they met completely different aliens to what we're used to seeing on Star Trek. So that was different, that was good, and that was also the first female captain. So that was interesting. A lot of the acting was good, a lot of the characters were good, and yeah, it would have taken them 70 years to get home, but they did it in 7. And so we will now go over to Star Trek 7, or also known as Star Trek Generations. So this one starts very cleverly. It starts off with Captain Kirk, Scotty and Chekhov going to the christening or opening, or I don't know what it's called, the launch of the new Enterprise, and it's the Enterprise B, and we've seen the design before because it's the same design as the Excelsior, which you saw in Star Trek 3. And yeah, it was good. You saw Captain Kirk actually die, but then we flash forward to 75 years into the future, and then what happens is we see the Starship Enterprise NCC 1701D, which is obviously Captain Picard's ship, and we see the Next Generation crew in movie format, and they're pretty good in movie format. The movie was good. I enjoyed it up to the part where Captain Kirk was taken into or taken out of the Nexus. It didn't really make much sense. So Captain Picard, to stop Dr. Soren, had to go back. Actually, he was in the Nexus already, so yeah, it's a bit confusing. So this Nexus is a energy ribbon that takes you to wherever the hell you want to go, if it exists or not. So when the Enterprise B met with the Nexus the very first time, when Captain Kirk died, he didn't actually die. He got transported into the Nexus. Because Picard's there as well, he decided to go and get help from Captain Kirk. And that's where the story ends, really. It had some good bits in it, it had some bad bits in it. But overall, I think it was a good movie. One of my highlights of the movie is right at the end, where Captain Picard says there's plenty more letters in the alphabet when talking to Riker about the Enterprise being destroyed. So there obviously will be another one. And boy, was there another one. Damn. So after Star Trek 7, there was Star Trek 8, or Star Trek First Contact. And this movie was amazing. When I went to watch it at the cinema, it was like, I don't know, it's like I knew everything and I didn't need to be told. And I was just, to be fair, I can't actually describe how I felt back then, but it was amazing. I enjoyed the movie, and I do still love that movie, so it's still one of my favourite Star Trek movies, if not the favourite Star Trek movie. So this movie has our arch enemy from Star Trek The Next Generation TV series, the Borg. Now the Borg are really, 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 really badass, because Borg go around from planet to planet, assimilating other cultures and races into their own collective, and they become one big massive hive of a network. It's like having loads of computers connected together. They all know what you're thinking, they all know what each other is thinking, and if you hurt one, the rest will come after you. But if you don't mess with any of them, they'll just leave you alone. It does seem quite weird, but it actually works. And then the other part of the movie was the time travel back into the time where Zefram Cochrane, who invented warp speed, where he took his first test flight and the Vulcans first came to Earth. Yeah, so that's another good moment in Star Trek movie history. So that's one of my favourite Star Trek movies. Now let's go to one of my favourite Star Trek episodes turned into a movie, but feels like an episode. So the next movie was Star Trek Insurrection. Now this had a really good plot. It had some good effects in it, and it was, I think, the last good Star Trek movie. I think it's one that I like to watch, but it's not one I would class as a favourite. It does have some really good shots of the Enterprise E, which we were introduced to in First Contact. But then, to end the Next Generation's collection of movies, we have Star Trek Nemesis, and I didn't like this movie. I still don't like this movie. The only bits of it I like are the non-Romulan bits. And I hate Romulans. I hate the fact that there's so many Romulan storylines, and I didn't like the fact that the Star Trek, J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movie started off with Romulans. But hey, we've got that timeline now, so it's good. And just another thing, it's not actually a reboot. It's a continuation, but in a different timeline. And the way it works is, or my theory of it is, that when Captain Picard and his crew went back in time in First Contact, they left some parts of the Borg ships and all their technology on the planet. So that's why Star Trek Enterprise, the TV show, is a bit more futuristic, because it's completely different. It's more advanced than the original series, even though it's meant to be set 100 years before the original series. So Captain Picard has actually created this timeline, if you think about it, in the chronological order of the Prime timeline. And then obviously Nero adds to it and becomes a complete arsehole who wants to kill Spock. And we see a completely different timeline where Uhura and Spock are together, were together, or are a thing. And we also see that Vulcan has been destroyed. And so it is different from the normal timeline or the Prime timeline. So it's still good to see, and it's not the same Star Trek, but it's still your Star Trek. It's still my Star Trek. And then we come up to Star Trek Into Darkness. Good movie, I thought. Not amazing. I didn't like what they did with the character. I didn't like what they did with Khan. And yeah, it wasn't executed very well, but there were some really good scenes in there, some good character development. And yeah, so let's move on. So Star Trek Beyond is the latest movie in the Kelvin timeline, and it is brilliant. I loved it to bits. It was such a good movie. It was written by Simon Pegg and some other dude. And that's what everyone keeps saying on the internet, some other dude. Or they thought it was Nick Frost. But I doubt it was Nick Frost. Anyway, yeah, so because he's such a big Star Trek fan, he got some things bang on. He got some things really right. They had a like a nod to the 50 years anniversary, and they had a nod to Spock because he died. Well, Spock didn't die. Leonard Nimoy died. So there was a really good tribute in the movie. And then Anton Yelchin also died in a freak car accident, and he got his name dedicated against the movie. Is that the way you say it? Well, he was mentioned at the end of the movie along with Leonard Nimoy, and that is a good movie. I urge you to go and watch it. Even if you've never seen an episode or a movie in your life, you will like it. Heck, my wife liked it, and she said to me when she got out the cinema, if Star Trek's like that, I will watch it. Which is good, because I've been trying to get her to watch Star Trek. She won't, but thanks to this movie, she will. Okay, so that is that. That is 50 years worth of Star Trek. There's over 720 or 750 hours of Star Trek that you can consume. It's fucking amazing, and there'll be more Star Trek to follow. So there's a new TV series currently being planned, shot, and whatever else, called Star Trek Discovery. So it's set in a timeline where it's after Kirk, but before Next Generation, and that's going to be interesting. I think that will be the definitive Star Trek series that a lot of people would like to get into. And the good thing about it is it won't all be on a ship, and it all won't be the captain that's going to be the hero or the heroine. It's going to be different. They're going to have different stories per series, maybe, or per episode, and it'll come together in one long story arc, which is something that Star Trek has done before. It's not totally new to the Star Trek franchise. Okay, so the next point I'm going to talk about is still Star Trek, and what Star Trek has done for us. So there's a lot of things Star Trek has done. It's people like Steve Jobs, I can't believe I just said that, Bill Gates and Steve Wozniak, and other scientists, actual scientists, I'm not talking about just computer scientists, who look at Star Trek and think, wow, that gadget is cool, that is cool, or that is cool, and then they try to develop it, and a lot of things that were on Star Trek have become reality. Automatic opening doors, the mobile phone, which is a really famous one. They are still working on a transporter, but if you ask Jeff Goldblum, he's already done that. And the other thing is the iPad. I think Star Trek can claim the iPad because it was in the original series, and it just looked like one of those etch and sketch things, but with two lights on there. And Captain Kirk would use a stylus and just sign the report. That was on the iPad tablet thing. But then in Next Generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager, the iPad tablet things were more prominent, and they were more advanced. They were sexy. They were proper sexy. We've had them in our Star Trek programs for a very, very long time. There was what else? The hypo spray is an actual thing now. It's like a medical syringe, which it doesn't have a needle, and it uses like high pressure to administer directly into the skin, even over clothes. And you'll see Dr. McCoy and Dr. Crusher use it a lot, where they'll just put it over the clothes and then just press, and it will just shoot like a however many milligrams into a person, and without touching them. And that's revolutionary if you think about like the disease and the illness that happens in the third world, like Africa and other countries. Like needles can't always be used because it's because there's fear of contamination and what have you. But if they had a hypo spray, they could just spray people just as they're walking along, and they don't have to inject them with a big massive needle that might get infected somehow. So yeah, there are other advancements as well. Some people are trying to make warp speed. Some people are trying to get the tricorder. Actually, you can get a tricorder now. I think I saw this article a couple of years ago where there is a company that's made a tricorder. Geordie's Visor, I think it was something, but I don't know what happened to it. I mean, in terms of like why it hasn't hit the market. Yeah, So Star Trek also invented the internet. So Star Trek also invented the talking computer, invented Siri basically, invented the iPod. So if anyone knows about the story of how the iPod came into being, it was thanks to Star Trek The Next Generation and an episode where Data was organizing his music tracks, and it gave what's his face, Mr. Ivy, his idea for creating a shuffleable computer, whatchamacallit, and he named it the iPod. And the rest, as I say, is history. So, everyone borrows from Star Trek, and even Star Trek borrows from other genres and other stories and what have you. Like Gene Roddenberry always said that Star Trek is Horatio Hornblower in space. Okay, if anyone doesn't know who Horatio Hornblower is, please Google it. So 50 years of Star Trek has given us humans some type of culture, just like everyone knows who Elvis Presley is. People know what Star Trek is. They might not like it, but they know what it is. So that's my little rundown of Star Trek. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to try and catch up on all the wrestling now, and I've got to have a shave for the morning so I don't look like a scruffy little bastard for when I run this Insight show. So I'm going to try and get some sleep as well, so good night. And as always, please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you again next time.